What happens when someone sends you a photograph of your nephew's mutilated body hanging from a tree with a mocking inscription on the back? What happens inside the mind of a man who built an empire on blood and fear when he realizes that someone dared to touch his family? And most importantly, what happens to those who dared to do it? Harlem, New York. It was Friday, the 14th of March, 1952, approximately 13 minutes before 10 in the evening. If you want to find out how this incredible story ends, the story of revenge that erased an entire town from the face of the earth, hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and click the bell so you never miss our next videos. Now let us return to the events of that evening. Ellsworth Raymond Johnson, whom the entire criminal underworld of the East Coast knew as Bumpy, sat in a deep leather armchair by the fireplace in his apartment on 147th Street. The fire crackled softly. The room smelled of Cuban cigar smoke and aged French brandy. He was rereading a letter from his younger sister Maybelle in Mississippi. Cheap yellow paper, careful schoolgirl handwriting, words full of hope. William wants to become a doctor. He is first in his class. He remembers what you told him, Ellsworth. Be what I could not be. Be someone who heals, not hurts. Bumpy smiled. His 17-year-old nephew, the first doctor in the family, a dream taking shape in the cotton fields of Mississippi. A knock at the door shattered the moment. Jerome Hunter, one of his captains, stood in the doorway. His granite face showed something Bumpy had never seen before. Fear. Not for himself, for the man he had to deliver news to. In his hand was a brown envelope. Postmark, Greenwood, Mississippi. No return address. Bumpy opened it with a silver letter opener. Inside was a photograph, black and white, sharp, professionally taken. Someone wanted every detail visible. A human body hanging from an oak branch, rope cutting into the neck, face mutilated beyond recognition. But Bumpy recognized. His eyes found the left arm instantly, the forearm, just above the wrist, a scar, a white stripe on dark skin. 7-year-old William fell off his bicycle. Uncle Bumpy drove him to the colored hospital in the next town. The boy did not cry. He just squeezed his uncle's hand and said, "I am strong, Uncle Bumpy. I will not cry." That boy was now hanging from a tree. Bumpy turned the photograph over. The inscription read, "Another nigger who did not know his place. Greetings from Delta County." The ink had smeared in one spot. Someone had spat on the paper before sending it. Bumpy looked at the photograph for 7 seconds. His hand did not tremble. His face did not change. His breathing remained steady. But Jerome Hunter felt something shift in the room, something that made the hair on his neck stand up, something that made him want to step backward and keep stepping until he was outside the building. Bumpy's voice was quiet, almost tender, the most terrifying sound Jerome had ever heard. Find out everything about this town, every street, every house, every name. You have 48 hours. He set the photograph down on the table next to Maybelle's letter. 2 documents, 2 worlds, a letter full of dreams about medical school, and a photograph of those dreams hanging dead from a tree. But before Bumpy would learn who sent that photograph, he needed to understand what happened 72 hours earlier on a dusty street in a town that would soon cease to exist. A town where a 17-year-old boy committed only one crime. He dared to be polite. Tuesday, the 11th of March, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Delta County, Mississippi, the town of Sunnyfield. William Johnson walked down the sidewalk, clutching a biology textbook to his chest. The March sun was warm on his shoulders. He was preparing for an exam. He was thinking about college applications. He was dreaming about the day he would wear a white coat and heal people instead of watching them suffer. Be what I could not be, Uncle Bumpy had told him. Be someone who heals, not hurts. William turned the corner. Mary Lou Carter, 23 years old, wife of the hardware store owner, stepped out of a shop without looking. Collision. The textbook fell. A bag of groceries tore. Oranges rolled across the pavement like scattered marbles. William did what his mother taught him. He bent down, collected the oranges, handed them to the woman, and said, "I am sorry, ma'am. I was not watching where I was going." He apologized. He touched her hand while passing the oranges. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then Mary Lou looked at his hand, at her hand, at his face, and she began to scream. Within 3 minutes, a crowd gathered. Within 10 minutes, Sheriff Clay McCormick arrived, his deputy badge catching the sunlight, his mouth working on a plug of tobacco. Within an hour, the whole town knew a black boy attacked Mary Lou Carter. The sheriff spat tobacco juice onto the sidewalk, inches from where the biology textbook lay open to a page about the human heart. "Boy, do you even understand what you have done? You should have kept your eyes on the ground and run. But you looked her in the eye? You touched her? Do you even know where you are?" His boot came down on the textbook, leaving a dirty print right across the diagram of cardiac chambers. The sheriff took William to the station for his own safety. But when the sun set and the streetlights flickered to life on Main Street, it became clear. The only thing the sheriff intended to protect the boy from was too quick an end. 10 o'clock that night. The holding cell at Sunnyfield's police station. William sat on an iron cot, his back against cold concrete. 7 hours without water, without food, without a phone call. His mother Maybelle had been standing outside the station doors for 3 hours. They would not let her in. A noise outside. First, a murmur of voices. Then, the roar of engines. Then, torches. 23 men. Pickup trucks lined the street like a funeral procession. Ropes coiled in truck beds. Canisters of gasoline catching the torchlight. Faces illuminated by fire. Farmers, shopkeepers, the postman, the butcher. Men William had seen every day of his life. Sheriff Clay McCormick stepped out onto the station porch. He looked at the crowd, at the torches, at the ropes, and he spoke 4 words that would seal his fate. "I am on my break." He walked out through the back door, left the keys on the desk, deliberately in plain sight. Maybelle screamed so loud they heard her on the other side of town. 2 men grabbed her arms, held her in place, made her watch, because she needed to see what happens to those who forget their place. 40 minutes later, it was over, but they did not disperse. They posed for photographs. Someone brought a camera, expensive, professional. They gathered around the oak tree, around William's body. They smiled. They waved. They passed the camera from hand to hand, each man wanting his own picture with the trophy. Someone brought beer. Someone told jokes. Someone suggested they send copies to all the uppity coloreds in the county so they remember. Mayor Howard Pickett raised his bottle. "Gentlemen, to law and order in our town, to everyone knowing their place." 23 voices echoed back. To law and order, the camera flash illuminated the scene. 23 smiling faces. 23 men who had just taken the life of a 17-year-old boy and were now posing as if they had returned from a successful hunting trip. And then someone got a clever idea. Why limit the message to Mississippi? Why not send it north? Why not show those city Negroes in New York what happens when someone forgets their place? They went through Maybelle's letters, found an address in Harlem, the address of someone named Ellsworth Johnson. They did not know who Ellsworth Johnson was. They did not care. Just another name, another Negro who needed to learn. $20 to a courier heading north. One photograph in an envelope, a message of terror, a message that landed on the desk of the most dangerous man on the East Coast, a message that signed the death warrant of every man who smiled for that camera. They thought they were sending fear north. They did not know that fear was about to come south, and it would come with fire. Sunday, the 16th of March, 3 o'clock in the morning. The back room of Wells Bar on 133rd Street in Harlem. Bumpy Johnson had not slept for 3 days. His eyes were red but focused. Before him lay a map of Mississippi, photographs, documents, names written in his own hand. His informants had worked without rest. Money opens most doors. Fear of Bumpy Johnson opens the rest. Jerome Hunter walked in, carrying a folder thick enough to be a small book. He spread the documents across the table without a word. 40 photographs, 40 faces, not 23, 40. Because Bumpy understood something that most people never grasp. A lynching is not the work of a few violent men. A lynching is a machine. It requires someone to look away, someone to refuse to make a phone call, someone to falsify documents, someone to preach that it was God's will, someone to print lies in the newspaper, someone to close the investigation before it begins. 23 participated directly, but 17 more kept the machine running. The sheriff who said, "I am on my break," the mayor who raised the toast, the doctor who listed cause of death as unknown circumstances, the judge who closed the case the next morning, the pastor who praised God for cleansing the community, the telephone operator who refused to connect Maybell to the state police, the newspaper editor who printed a story about a Negro vagrant who met an unfortunate end. Every cog in that machine was guilty, every single one. Bumpy took out a pen. He circled 39 faces with slow, deliberate movements. Then he stopped at the 40th face, Mayor Howard Pickett, the man who raised the toast, the man who said law and order while a boy's body swung from a tree. He did not circle this face. He drew a cross through it. They think they killed some poor Negro boy from the backwoods. They do not know they killed my boy. They sent me a photograph because they thought it would frighten others. In 7 days, they will learn what real fear means. In 7 days, this town will cease to exist. He pinned William's photograph to the map, the living one, smiling, wearing his graduation suit. Next to it, he pinned the list of 40 names, 2 images, a boy who wanted to heal people, and 40 people who needed to be held accountable. Find me, Leroy Washington. Tell him I have a job, the kind he trained for in the Army, the kind he hasn't done since Germany. Day 1, 7 days remaining, Monday, the 17th of March, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The Greyhound bus from Memphis pulled into Sunnyfield with a wheeze of hydraulic brakes. Leroy Silent Washington stepped off carrying a worn leather suitcase and a sample case filled with Bibles. 42 years old, former Army sapper, veteran of the Second World War, a man who had crawled through minefields in the dark and disarmed bombs while artillery shells exploded around him. Now he was George Cartwright, Bible salesman from Memphis. His smile was wide and warm. His voice was soft and deferential. Every sentence ended with sir or ma'am. His eyes stayed low when white folks passed. The perfect disguise, the invisible man. He checked into the only rooming house that accepted colored guests, a cramped room above a funeral parlor on the black side of the railroad tracks. The irony was not lost on him. He was staying above the dead while planning to create more of them. For 2 days, Leroy mapped the town. He learned the rhythms. When the sheriff ate lunch, when the mayor visited his mistress, when the bars closed. He sold Bibles door to door, and white people talked freely in front of him. Some of them bragged about what they did to that uppity colored boy 2 weeks ago. On Wednesday morning, he found what he was looking for. A poster on the bulletin board outside the general store. Spring Ball, March 29th, Municipal Building. All respectable citizens welcome. Every year, the last Saturday of March, the entire white population gathered in the municipal building for the Spring Ball. Every family, every business owner, every pillar of the community, all 40 names on Bumpy's list would be there, and the municipal building ran on gas. Wednesday afternoon, Leroy requested a tour of the building, said he was considering moving his Bible business to town. The building manager, a portly man named Henderson, who was number 31 on the list, was happy to show him around. The boiler room was in the basement. Gas lines ran throughout the structure. The system was 30 years old. Maintenance records were spotty. One valve, that was all it would take. Leroy stood in the basement, memorizing the layout, calculating angles and pressures, when a voice behind him froze his blood. "Your face looks familiar." He turned slowly. The dim light from a basement window illuminated a face from the photographs. Dwayne Pickett, nephew of the mayor, number 17 on the list. Big, farm strong, a hunting knife on his belt. "I know you from somewhere. Harlem, 49. You were with that crew that worked for—" What was his name? Leroy kept his smile in place, the Bible salesman's smile, the harmless Negro smile. "Sir, I think you might have me confused with someone else. I am just passing through, selling the good word. Would you like to see our latest edition? Genuine leather binding—" "Shut up!" Dwayne stepped closer. His hand moved toward his knife. "Johnson, you worked for that nigger Johnson." The knife came out, and then 2 shadows detached from the darkness behind Dwayne. Bumpy's insurance policy. Men Leroy did not know were in town. Contingencies within contingencies. The first shadow hit Dwayne behind the knees. The second caught him around the throat as he fell. A rag soaked in chloroform covered his face. 30 seconds. That was all it took. 20 minutes later, Dwayne Pickett sat bound and gagged in an abandoned barn 5 miles outside town. Leroy crouched in front of him, removed the gag. "You wanted to know if I work for Johnson?" "Yes, I do. And in 5 days, you are going to find out what that means, along with everyone else." Fear replaced confusion in Dwayne's eyes. That was different. He apologized, like a gentleman. "And you helped hang him from a tree." Leroy stood. Now his uncle knows, and his uncle does not forgive. His uncle does not forget. His uncle is coming. They left Dwayne in the barn, fed him once a day, kept him gagged. The search began the next morning. Mayor Pickett organized it himself. Deputies from 3 counties. They never thought to look in the old Morrison barn. Day 4, 3 days remaining, 1 target secured early, Thursday evening. Leroy walked back toward town along the dirt road that led past the old Jennings property. He had been avoiding this route for 3 days. He could not avoid it any longer. The oak tree stood alone in the field, massive, ancient, Spanish moss hanging from its branches like gray funeral shrouds. A piece of rope still dangled from one thick branch, frayed at the end where someone had cut it down. No one had bothered to remove it. Leroy stopped. For 2 days he had been the invisible man, smiling, deferential, playing a role, doing a job. Now, standing in front of the tree where a 17-year-old boy took his last breath, the mask slipped. His smile disappeared. His jaw tightened. His hands clenched into fists at his sides. He looked up at the branch, at the rope, at the marks in the bark where the rope had worn grooves during those 40 minutes of struggling. 17 years old, wanted to be a doctor, picked up some oranges for a woman who bumped into him, and they hung him here, and they smiled, and they took photographs. Leroy stood there for 60 seconds, not moving, not speaking, just looking. Then the mask returned. The smile came back. The shoulders relaxed. But something behind his eyes had changed. He walked back to town with a new kind of purpose in his step. The job was no longer just professional, it was personal now. Friday morning. Leroy made his final call from the phone booth on the edge of town. Found it. March 29th, spring ball, all eggs in one basket. Gas system is old. Town is 30 years behind on inspections. One valve and the whole building becomes a bomb. I can do this. Bumpy's voice was calm. How many innocents will be there? Hard to say exactly. Could be 200, maybe more. Women, children, guests from other towns. Then we need a way to separate them. No innocents, Leroy. Only the 40. We are not them. We do not kill the blameless. That is going to be complicated. Then uncomplicated. You have 8 days. Figure it out. The line went dead. Leroy hung up the phone, stood in the booth for a long moment, watching the sun rise over the cotton fields. 8 days to figure out how to kill 40 guilty men in a room full of 300 people. 8 days to separate the sheep from the goats. 8 days until Sunnyfield learned the true meaning of justice. And somewhere in Washington, a file had just landed on an FBI agent's desk. Unusual activity in Harlem, large sums moving south, whispered rumors about something too monstrous to be real. The clock was ticking, on everything. Saturday, the 29th of March, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Sunnyfield was preparing for its biggest night of the year. Women pressed their finest dresses. Men polished shoes that only came out of closets for weddings, funerals, and the spring ball. Children ran through the streets, excited by the promise of cake and music and staying up past bedtime. The smell of roast beef drifted from the municipal building's kitchen. No one noticed the 3 unmarked trucks that had entered town over the past 24 hours. No one questioned the delivery men who seemed to be working late at the municipal building. No one thought twice about the colored janitor who had been cleaning the basement since early morning. Leroy Washington had spent the last 12 hours in the boiler room, slowly, methodically, reconfiguring the gas system with the precision of a surgeon. The main valve now worked in reverse. Instead of feeding gas to the furnace and dispersing excess safely outside, it would redirect the flow into the building's ventilation system, slowly, invisibly. The smell would be faint at first. Most people would not notice over the scent of perfume, cigar smoke, and roast beef. By midnight, the building would be a bomb waiting for a spark. 5 o'clock. The team took positions. 2 men at the back exit, dressed as kitchen workers carrying crates of supplies. 2 more at the side entrance, posing as musicians loading equipment. A 5th man on the church bell tower across the street, binoculars in hand. A checklist of 40 names tucked into his jacket pocket. His job was simple but critical. Watch everyone who entered. Check them against the list. Count. Verify. Confirm that all 40 targets were inside before the final phase began. 6 o'clock. The first guests arrived. Mayor Pickett and his wife dressed in their Sunday best, despite it being Saturday. Sheriff McCormick in a suit that strained against his belly, his deputy badge polished to a mirror shine. The doctor who had falsified William's death certificate. The judge who had closed the case. The pastor who had praised God for cleansing the community. One by one, they walked through the front doors of the municipal building, smiling, laughing, greeting neighbors they saw every day as if this night were somehow special. It was, just not in the way they imagined. 7 o'clock, 31 names checked off the list. 8 o'clock, 37. 9 o'clock, 39. The man in the bell tower raised his binoculars, scanning the street for the final name. Benjamin Tate, the telephone operator's husband, number 40 on the list. He had been sick with influenza all week. Rumors said he might not attend. If he did not come, the operation would have to wait. Another opportunity, another plan, months of additional preparation. 9:15. A car pulled up to the municipal building. Benjamin Tate, pale and sweating, but determined to make an appearance, stepped out with his wife supporting his arm. He coughed twice, wiped his forehead with a handkerchief, and walked slowly toward the entrance. The man in the bell tower spoke into his radio. 40 confirmed. All targets inside. Repeat. All 40 inside. In the basement, Leroy heard the message through his earpiece. He looked at his watch. 9:17. The gas had been flowing for 4 hours. The building was saturated. Anyone inside would be feeling slightly drowsy, slightly lightheaded. They would attribute it to the punch, the dancing, the excitement. They would be wrong. 9:30. Bumpy Johnson's voice came through the radio from New York. His final authorization, delivered from a club on 125th Street, where 20 witnesses would later swear he had been all night. Make sure every one of the 40 stays inside, not one less, and make absolutely certain no innocents, only the guilty. We are not them, Leroy acknowledged. This was the part of the plan that had kept him awake for 2 weeks. How do you kill 40 specific people in a building filled with 300? The answer had come from an unexpected source, a conversation with a fire marshal in Memphis, bribed with $500 to explain emergency evacuation procedures. 9:45. A fire alarm screamed through the building. Not the gas explosion, not yet, just the alarm, triggered manually by one of Leroy's men in the kitchen. Panic, chaos, 300 people rushing toward the exits, pushing, shoving, screaming. The band stopped playing. The lights flickered, but the exits were controlled. 4 men stood at the doors, 2 at the back, 2 at the side. The main entrance jammed accidentally in exactly 2 minutes. Each man held a photograph in his pocket. Each man had memorized 40 faces. The crowd poured out into the night air, gasping, relieved, confused. And as they passed through the doors, they were sorted. Not on the list. Go. Not on the list. Go. On the list. Step aside, sir. Fire marshal needs to verify the building is clear. It happened so fast that most people did not notice. The guilty ones were pulled from the stream of evacuees, told to wait, told there were questions about the alarm. They were ushered back inside through a service entrance. By 10 o'clock, the municipal building was empty except for 40 men. 40 confused, frightened, increasingly suspicious men, and every door was now locked from the outside. 10:15. Inside the municipal building, Mayor Howard Pickett was the first to understand that something was terribly wrong. Why are the doors locked? He pulled at the main entrance. It did not move. Sheriff, get these doors open. Sheriff McCormick tried the side exit. Locked. The back entrance, locked. The windows, painted shut years ago, never reopened. There has to be a fire escape, someone said. Building codes require... This is Mississippi, the sheriff snapped. Building codes are suggestions. 40 men stood in the main hall, their formal suits now damp with sweat that had nothing to do with the temperature. The air was thick, heavy, wrong. Do you smell that? Dr. Harrison Wells sniffed the air. His medical training kicked in half a second before his denial. Gas. That is gas. Silence. Then chaos. Men threw themselves against doors, pounded on windows, screamed for help. But the windows were painted shut. The doors were reinforced from outside. The nearest neighbor was 300 yards away at the church, which was now empty, its bell tower occupied by a man with binoculars and a radio. 10:30. The lights went out. Emergency power should have kicked in. It did not. Leroy's team had disabled the backup generator 2 hours earlier. 40 men stood in absolute darkness, breathing air that was slowly poisoning them. 10:45. A voice came through the building's public address system. Leroy Washington's voice filled the darkness. "Gentlemen, 3 weeks ago you killed William Johnson, a 17-year-old boy, a student, a son, a nephew." Inside the building, 40 men stopped moving, stopped breathing. His uncle sends his regards. The public address system clicked off. Mayor Pickett found his voice. "Who are you? What do you want? Money? We can pay." Silence answered him. 11 o'clock. The first man collapsed. Benjamin Tate, already weakened by influenza, his lungs giving out first. He fell to his knees, gasping, clutching his throat. Others followed. The gas concentration was reaching lethal levels. Men stumbled, fell, crawled toward doors that would not open. 11:30. Sheriff McCormick managed to break a small pane of glass in a back window, not enough to escape through, but enough to let in fresh air. He pressed his face to the opening, gulping oxygen, watching his fellow townsmen stagger and fall behind him. And then he saw them. 4 figures standing in the shadows across the street, not moving, not helping, just watching. One of them raised a hand, not a wave, a signal. 11:58. Leroy Washington walked calmly to the gas main outside the building. The concentration inside had reached optimal levels. Every man still conscious was barely so. He struck a match, held it for 3 seconds, watching the flame dance in the Mississippi night air. Then he tossed it through the broken window Sheriff McCormick had created. Midnight. The explosion split the night in two. The fireball rose 60 feet into the air. Windows exploded outward in a shower of glass that could be heard from half a mile away. The walls buckled. The roof collapsed inward. The beautiful white columns that had framed the entrance for 30 years crumbled like sand. By 12:12, the building was fully engulfed. The volunteer fire department arrived at 12:20. By then, there was nothing to do but watch it burn. By dawn, only the foundation remained. The fire chief began counting remains at 7 in the morning. The count would take 3 days. Final tally, 40 dead. 40 men, no women, no children, no guests from other towns. Exactly 40. As if someone had chosen them specifically, as if someone had made a list. Sunday morning, 8 o'clock, federal agents arrived 6 hours after the explosion. Special Agent Robert McIntyre stood on the ruins and tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The scene was wrong. Everything about it was wrong. Blast pattern indicates gas accumulated throughout the entire structure before ignition. That takes hours. Someone reconfigured the system deliberately. He walked the perimeter. 40 victims, all male, all residents of Sunnyfield. Not a single woman, not a single child. Someone separated them from the crowd. Someone chose exactly who would live and who would die. Among the debris, they found one piece of paper, charred around the edges but partially legible. A note, one word visible, William. McIntyre turned to the deputy sheriff. "Who is William?" The man's face went pale. "William Johnson, colored boy. There was an incident 3 weeks ago. The town handled it." The pieces clicked into place. Who participated? The deputy pulled a crumpled list from his pocket. 40 names. The same 40 names now lying in the ruins. All of them. Every man who died last night. They were all there. McIntyre stared at the list, then at the ruins. Someone made their own list. Someone identified every person involved. And someone executed them all, simultaneously, in one night. This was not revenge. This was a military operation. They found Dwayne Pickett in the Morrison barn 3 hours later, alive, unharmed, completely broken. When they removed his gag, he said only one word, over and over, until they sedated him. Johnson, 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 Johnson. The federal investigation into the Sunnyfield explosion lasted 3 months. 147 people were interviewed. Every truck that entered town in the week before the blast was traced. Every stranger who passed through was identified and questioned. The results were conclusive in their inconclusiveness. The Bible salesman who called himself George Cartwright from Memphis did not exist. No such person had ever been registered with any Bible distribution company. No such person had ever lived at the Memphis address he provided. The rooming house landlady could only describe a polite colored man with a nice smile. The delivery trucks had legitimate manifests. The drivers had solid alibis. The men who controlled the exits during the evacuation had vanished like smoke. 0 charges, 0 suspects, 0 answers. And the man whose name Dwayne Pickett kept repeating, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson of Harlem, New York, had an ironclad alibi. 23 witnesses, including a city councilman and 2 police officers, placed him at a club on 125th Street from 8 in the evening until 2 in the morning on the night of the explosion. Agent McIntyre flew to New York anyway. He sat across from Bumpy Johnson in a Harlem restaurant, surrounded by men who watched the federal agent with the casual alertness of wolves observing a deer that had wandered into their territory. Mr. Johnson, I know you did this. Bumpy sipped his coffee. Did what exactly? Killed 40 men in Sunnyfield, Mississippi. I was in New York that night. I have witnesses. Many witnesses. You did not pull the trigger yourself. You never do. But you planned it. You funded it. You ordered it. Bumpy set down his cup. For a long moment, he simply looked at the federal agent. The look a teacher might give a student who has asked a question with an obvious answer. Agent McIntyre, let me ask you something. Have you ever been to Mississippi as a colored man? Have you ever had to step off the sidewalk when a white woman passed? Have you ever been refused service at a restaurant, a hotel, a hospital? Have you ever watched someone you love disappear in the night and know that no one will ever be punished? McIntyre said nothing. My nephew was 17 years old. He picked up some oranges for a woman who bumped into him. He said, I am sorry, ma'am. For this crime, he was dragged from a jail cell and hanged from a tree while his mother watched. The men who did this posed for photographs. They sent one of those photographs to me as a souvenir, as a warning. Bumpy leaned forward. And then, according to you, those same men died in a gas explosion, an accident, a tragedy. These things happen in old buildings with poor maintenance. The official report will say so, because the alternative is admitting that someone held those men accountable. And if that someone exists, then every man in every town across the South who has ever participated in a lynching would have to start looking over his shoulder. He smiled, a cold smile that never reached his eyes. That would be destabilizing. That would disrupt the social order. Better to call it an accident. Better to close the case. Better to let everyone believe that the South can still do whatever it wants to colored folk without consequences. McIntyre stood. I will find proof. No, you will not. Because there is no proof to find. There is only a gas explosion in a building that should have been condemned years ago. A tragedy. 40 upstanding citizens. Thoughts and prayers. Bumpy returned to his coffee. Good day, Agent McIntyre. Have a safe flight back to Washington. The investigation was officially closed in July of 1952. Cause of death, accidental gas explosion due to faulty equipment and poor building maintenance. No charges filed, no suspects identified. But in black neighborhoods from Harlem to Chicago to Detroit to Los Angeles, the story spread through whispers and knowing looks. The story of a town that killed a boy and paid the price. The story of a man who did not forgive, did not forget, and did not fail. The story of Bumpy's Law. Touch our people, and there will be a reckoning, not from the courts, not from the police, from us. And that reckoning has no statute of limitations. Sunnyfield, Mississippi, officially existed until 1957. After the explosion, most residents moved away. Those who stayed never spoke of that night. Never, to anyone. The welcome sign at the town's entrance stood until the 1960s, faded, rusting, forgotten. But the law Bumpy Johnson established that night was not forgotten. For 30 years afterward, every criminal organization on the East Coast operated under one unwritten rule. Families were untouchable. Women and children were off limits, because everyone remembered what happened when someone broke that rule. Everyone remembered Sunnyfield. Everyone remembered the 40. Everyone remembered what Bumpy Johnson did when they sent him a photograph of his nephew hanging from a tree. And in Bumpy's jacket pocket, until the day he departed this world in 1968, there remained a single photograph. Not the one they sent him, the other one, William Johnson, 17 years old, smiling in his graduation suit. A boy who wanted to be a doctor. A boy who wanted to heal, not hurt. A boy whose dream ended on a tree in Mississippi, and whose justice came on a Saturday night in flames. Bumpy's Law. Some say it still echoes today. Some say that in certain circles, in certain rooms, when someone suggests targeting a family member, an older voice will speak up. Remember Sunnyfield. Remember what happened to the 40. Remember Bumpy. And the conversation ends there, because some lessons once taught are never forgotten, and some debts once paid are paid forever. This was the story of Bumpy Johnson and the town that ceased to exist. This was the story of 40 men who thought they could kill a boy and face no consequences. This was the story of a photograph sent as a warning that became an invitation to destruction. And this was the story of a law, unwritten, unspoken, but absolute, that changed the rules of the underworld forever. Bumpy's Law. Touch ours, and we touch back. Harder,